Compound composition can be described in two major ways, through compound formula or through percent composition or mass percent. The compound formula describes a compound in terms of the number of its constituents. For example, if I look at the compound formula of sulfuric acid, I will see that it's made of hydrogen atoms, sulfur atoms and oxygen atoms, and to 2 hydrogen atoms there would be 1 sulfur atom and 4 oxygen atoms. And if I look at the compound formula of, let's say, water, I will see that it's made out of hydrogen and oxygen, and to 2 atoms of hydrogen there would be always 1 atom of the oxygen. Percent composition or mass percent describes a compound in terms of mass percentages of its constituents. For example, if I look at any sample of water, doesn't matter how big or small, 11% of all the mass of my sample would be coming from the mass of all the hydrogen in it. And 89% of all the mass of any sample of water would be coming from the mass of all the oxygen atoms in it. If we look at the formula of sulfuric acid, any sample of sulfuric acid would contain 2% of the mass that would be coming from the hydrogen, 33% of all the mass of the sample would be coming from the mass of all the sulfur in it, and 65% would be coming from the mass of all the oxygens. If we have compound formula, then we always can calculate percent composition of that compound. We are using this formula. Percent composition by mass would be the mass of part divided by the mass of whole multiplied by 100%. So let's calculate percent composition of 1 mole of water. To calculate percent composition by mass of water, I first need to find out the mass of my whole sample, the mass of 1 mole of water. To do that, I need to calculate molar mass of water. So it would be the mass of 2 moles of hydrogen atoms plus the mass of 1 mole of oxygen atoms. So altogether, 1 mole of water would have the mass of 18 grams. This is our number for the denominator in our equation. Let's find the numbers for numerator, the mass of part. So the mass of part that is hydrogen in our 1 mole of water would be 2 grams because we have 2 moles of hydrogen in it. And the mass of all the oxygen, the part that is oxygen, would have the mass 16 grams. To calculate percent composition of the hydrogen in our sample of water, we take the mass of hydrogen, and there are 2 grams that would be the mass of hydrogen in our sample, and divided by the mass of the whole sample, which is 18 grams, multiplied by 100%. We end up with 11%. And to calculate the percent composition of the oxygen, we do the same. We take the mass of the oxygen, the mass of the part that is oxygen, which is 16 grams, divided by the mass of the whole sample, 18 grams, multiplied by 100%, and we have 89%. So percent composition of hydrogen in any sample of water would be 11% by mass, and percent composition of oxygen by mass in any sample of water would be 89%. Quick check for your calculations. Percent composition of all the elements in the compound should add up to 100%. Here is another example. Let's calculate percent composition of the constituents of sulfuric acid. And to start my calculations, I will first calculate the mass of the whole sample. I need to calculate the mass of 1 mole of sulfuric acid, which is easy to do using our molar mass of sulfuric acid. 1 mole of sulfuric acid is made of 2 moles of hydrogen, 2 moles of hydrogen atoms, 1 mole of sulfur atoms, and 4 moles of oxygen atoms. So all of them add up together to 98 grams. So 1 mole of sulfuric acid would have the mass of 98 grams, and we found our denominator number for here. Now, to find out the mass of part, we can look at our formula and see that the mass of all the hydrogen in our 1 mole of sulfuric acid would be 2 grams. And the mass of the part that is sulfur is 32 grams. And the mass of all the oxygen in our 1 mole of sulfuric acid would be 64 grams. And now we just plug in numbers. For percent composition of the hydrogen, we take mass of the part that is hydrogen, 2 grams, divided by the mass of the whole sample, 98 grams, times 100%, which gives us 2%. Percent composition of sulfur, once again, we take the mass of the part that is sulfur, 32 grams of the 1 mole of our compound would be the mass of the sulfur, divided by the mass of the whole compound times 100%. Here is our answer. And the percent composition of the oxygen, we take all the mass that is coming from the oxygen divided by the mass of the whole sample, multiply by 100%. The answer is 65%. So, out of our entire sample, 2% of all the mass would be coming from the mass of the hydrogen atoms, and 33% of all the mass of our sample would be coming from the mass of all the sulfur in the sample, and 65% of all the mass of our sample would be coming from the mass of all the oxygen. And what is important to understand that it doesn't matter how big or small is our sample. We can be talking about 1 mole of sulfuric acid, we can be talking about 2 kilograms or 2 tons of sulfuric acid. Every single time, we can be talking about actually 1 molecule of sulfuric acid. Every single time, those percentages that we calculated for it would be correct. Out of the entire mass of the sample, 2% would be from the hydrogen, 33% from the sulfur, and 65% of all the mass would be coming from the mass of the oxygen. And once again, don't forget to check quickly if your calculations were correct by adding up all the percentages that you calculated. If they add up to 100%, most probably your calculations are correct. If they don't, check your calculations.